Okay, so we're going to talk about post-war depression today, the causes and the effects of it in this video. So before we do that, I need to clarify something. I don't know why. I am just determined that Bulgaria is going to be a new country when it's really not. So let's go back for a second and look at this map. So on this map, in the last video, I said that Bulgaria and Romania were both new countries. They were not. So if we look at it, you should see that Yugoslavia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, you know that that kingdom, that empire split up. And then you also have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They were all these new countries. Those were our new countries, not Bulgaria and not Romania. So I apologize for misspeaking. I don't know why I am so determined to make them new countries when they are not. So let's get on into our post-war depression. We're going to take a look at what some of the causes and effects of the post-war depression were. So as you can see here in the picture on the left, the children are playing with bricks. So what I want you to do is just for a second think about it, and I want you to tell me, what do you think these bricks are made of? What is it you think they are actually playing with? Okay, so maybe you said that it was wood. Maybe you thought that they were concrete. You could have written down that they were playing with boxes, but what they're actually playing with are bricks of money, like paper money, okay, like dollar bills. Money had pretty much lost all of its value during the Great Depression, and it just didn't have the same value that it used to have. So people would sometimes burn it at night to keep themselves warm, and children were able to play with it like they were those block bricks that maybe you played with when you were a kid, because it just had no value. Okay, so let's look at what some of the causes or the reasons were for that. One of the first reasons, is that there was an increase in protective tariffs. So you should remember that vocabulary term, tariff. It is another word for tax. Countries were increasing the taxes on products that were being imported into their country, the things that people were buying and trading with other countries for. What they were really trying to do was to encourage people to buy goods from home. That way, the money would stay at home in their own country, helping their own economy instead of helping the economy of another country. There was also too much credit available. People were buying stock on the stock market, and what they were doing was buying stock on margin. Now, this means that they would buy their stock and only pay a small percentage of that cost as a down payment. So after that, the rest of the money they needed to buy the stock with, they would borrow from a stockbroker. Now, this works fine as long as stock prices continue to go up because they're making money off of it. But once those stock prices start to decrease, once they start to drop, it ends up not working at all. People go into a panic and they want to sell all of their stock as soon as possible. So no one is going to be there to buy all of the stock out there on the market, and the market ends up collapsing. There was also an overproduction of goods. You can see here in this photograph, this is a bicycle factory. By 1929, U.S. factories were turning out almost half of the world's industrial goods. That's a lot. Almost half of them we were producing here in the United States. This leads to enormous profits for the people who were the owners of the factories and the investors in these factories. But this wealth is not evenly distributed. 60% of American families at this point in time were only earning about $2,000 a year. Let that soak in for a minute. $2,000 a year. Not a lot of money to live off of. So, because people were not making that much money, the store owners were not able to sell their goods. As a result, factories had to reduce production and eventually lay off workers. So this begins to contribute to unemployment rates, people not having jobs, and all of that sort of stuff that goes along with that as well. Farmers were also being affected in the same way. The same thing happened with the food that they were producing on their farms. Now, our fourth cause is that the United States had pretty much dominated the world market. Now, why this happens, or why this is a cause of the depression, is that American bankers see what's going on, and they got really, really worried. So they began to demand repayment of these overseas loans that they had made to other countries. It's very common for other countries to borrow money from each other back and forth. It's also common to have investors that will invest in those countries. So when all of this financial crisis starts to go down, American bankers get a little concerned and they end up demanding repayment of their overseas loans. And the investors who had been investing in these other countries are going to withdraw their money from these European countries. So the people who end up being affected the most are going to be your common everyday folks that are living in these countries. In 1929, we see the stock market crash in the United States. It was because our war debts and the dependence on American loans and investments, Germany and Austria were hit especially hard. Now, in 1931, we end up seeing Austria's largest bank fail. Because we're a pretty big player in the world market at this point, when our stock market crashes, it has a ripple effect, and it affected everyone else around the world. The sixth cause that we are going to talk about are the German reparations payments. You'll remember that the Germans had to pay over $3 billion, and we talked about how much money that would be in the early 1920s. It's still a huge amount of money today. So what Germany thought they would do is just print more money and give that to the commission for their reparations payments. Well, it doesn't quite work that way, because the more money you print, the more paper money you print, the less value it actually holds, because there's too much of it out there in the market. So when they decided that they were going to start printing off more money, it actually doesn't work. It backfires. And they're not actually able to help their economy at all. It hurts them because their currency ends up losing the value that it had once had. Now let's look at some of the effects. Some of the effects that we end up seeing are high employment. So all of the men that you see in this photograph, you can see the line of men extends past the frame of this picture. They're all standing in line waiting for free soup or coffee or donuts, like it says on the sign. This is where we start to see churches and groups organized together, and they would have a soup kitchen or a bread kitchen, and they would try to have at least one meal a day that unemployed folks who were out trying to find a job, they could at least get one square meal a day. We also see banks fail. And what you're looking at here is a photograph of a bank run. So the people who had put their money in the banks, they used to think that their money was literally sitting in the bank. And people still think that sometimes today, like that the money that you put into it is literally sitting there. So if I went to the bank with $100 and I deposit it, people think that that $100 is still sitting physically in that bank. Not the case, okay? That was not the case. So you're going to watch a clip from It's a Wonderful Life. Let me give you a little bit of background on it. The main character is George and his wife. They've just gotten married, literally just gotten married. And they're getting ready to go off on their honeymoon. And they notice that something funny is going down around town. So they stop. George works at the building and loan. So what that does, it was a way that people were able to borrow money to build their own home, and then they would repay George. So once they repaid George, George is able to loan their money out to somebody else, and you'll see him explain that to the people in the video as they're trying to take out all of their money. There's going to be a guy named Mr. Potter who calls, and he's the big rich man in town, and he is not the nicest guy. He takes advantage of people, and he doesn't treat them very kindly. And you're going to see him call George and make an offer to George. You'll see how the people react to that as well. So take a minute, watch the clip, and then we will come back and finish the rest of our notes. All right, the third effect of the post-war depression was the collapse of credit. People don't have the money. People don't have jobs, so there is no way that they can just buy things on credit anymore. Because remember, you do have to end up paying things on credit. It's like a loan. You say you're going to buy this thing, and then at the end of 30 days or whatever, you're going to pay it off. Well, if you don't have a job, you don't have any income coming in, you can't pay those bills. Our fourth effect was that prices end up decreasing in world trade. There's not going to be a whole lot of world trade going on at this point because of these high protective tariffs that had been put out there. Plus, the money just isn't flowing. So people just don't have the money to be able to go out and shop and buy things the way that they used to be able to. Your fifth effect of the post-war depression that we see is an an increase in the importance of the Nazi Party in Germany. And so that leads us to our last effect that we're going to talk about today, that the Nazi Party, they end up blaming European Jews for the economic collapse. They were looking for someone to blame. They were looking for a scapegoat. And so they turned their attention to the European Jews, and that's who they blame. So we're not going to get too in depth with that right now, but we are going to talk about it more, about the Nazi Party and the European Jews in our next unit, which is World War II.